Most people outside Missouri have no idea what's happening in St. Louis right now. They still picture an old Midwest city that's shrinking, struggling, or stuck in the past. But meanwhile, families, remote workers, and even young professionals are quietly moving here from places with skyrocketing housing costs and nonstop stress. And honestly, once you see the numbers and the lifestyle people are getting here, it starts to make a lot of sense. Imagine selling a tiny house in a high cost city, then moving somewhere you can actually afford more space, a backyard, shorter commutes, great food, passionate sports culture, and still keep access to major city amenities. That's exactly why St. Louis has started showing up on more relocation lists lately. But here's the interesting part. Most people moving here say the biggest surprise wasn't just the lower cost of living, it was how much easier life started to feel once they arrived. In this video, we're breaking down the 7 biggest reasons why people are moving to St. Louis, Missouri right now, and some of these might completely change the way you look at this city. And real quick, if you're thinking about relocating, investing, or learning more about living in St. Louis, make sure you subscribe and like the video because this channel is all about helping people make smarter relocation decisions without the hype. The biggest reason people are moving to St. Louis is simple. Housing still feels attainable here. In a lot of major cities right now, buying a home feels almost impossible. People are paying huge monthly rents for tiny apartments, competing in bidding wars, and stretching their finances just to stay afloat. But when many of those same people start looking at St. Louis, they realize something shocking. Their money suddenly goes way further. We're talking about larger homes, actual yards, more square footage, and neighborhoods with character, often for a fraction of what similar homes cost in places like California, Texas, Colorado, or even parts of Florida now. And it's not just about saving money, it's about changing your lifestyle. A lot of families move here, talk about finally having room for their kids to play, space for a home office, or simply being able to breathe financially again without feeling crushed every month. Remote workers, especially, are realizing they don't need to stay in expensive cities if they can work from anywhere. Instead of barely surviving in a crowded market, they can own a home, lower their expenses, and still enjoy city amenities. Another thing people notice quickly is that St. Louis still has neighborhoods with personality. Instead of endless rows of identical developments, you'll find historic brick homes, tree-lined streets, walkable communities, and areas that actually feel unique. That matters more than people realize when choosing where to live long term. That financial breathing room also creates opportunities people haven't had in years. More travel, more savings, less stress, more flexibility. And for many people relocating here, that's the moment St. Louis stops feeling like a backup option and starts feeling like a smart move. Another reason people are moving to St. Louis is something you don't fully appreciate until you actually live here. St. Louis sits in a central location that makes traveling around the country surprisingly easy. Whether you're flying for work, visiting family, or taking road trips, you can reach a huge portion of the United States without dealing with the chaos that comes with larger metro areas. And that balance is what catches many newcomers off guard. You still get major city amenities, professional sports, restaurants, entertainment, hospitals, universities, and shopping, but daily life usually feels far less stressful than places like Chicago, Atlanta, or Los Angeles. Traffic is another huge factor. In many cities, people lose hours every week sitting on packed highways just trying to get across town. In St. Louis, most commutes are far more manageable, which means people actually get more time back in their day. That may sound small, but over time, it changes your quality of life in a big way. People moving here often say they didn't realize how exhausting constant traffic, overcrowding, and nonstop rushing had become until they experienced a slower and more practical pace. And when you combine that convenience with affordability, St. Louis starts becoming a very attractive middle ground, especially for people who want city benefits without big city burnout. One thing that surprises a lot of people after moving to St. Louis is how much there actually is to do here. The city has a personality that feels very different from many fast growing metro areas that can sometimes feel generic or overly commercialized. St. Louis has history, local traditions, loyal neighborhoods, and a food culture people become attached to very quickly. And the food scene is a huge part of that. You've got legendary Italian restaurants on the hill, local barbecue spots people argue about constantly, family owned diners that have been around for decades, and a growing brewery scene that gives the city a very social atmosphere on weekends. A lot of newcomers say they expected average Midwest food and ended up discovering one of the most underrated food cities in the country. But it goes beyond restaurants. One of the biggest lifestyle advantages in St. Louis is the amount of free attractions available to families and residents. That's something people really appreciate once they live here full time. You can spend a weekend exploring Forest Park, visiting the zoo, checking out museums, walking trails, festivals, concerts, or local events without constantly feeling pressured to spend huge amounts of money just to have a good time. And Forest Park itself is massive. A lot of people don't realize it's actually larger than Central Park in New York City. That combination of affordability and entertainment creates a lifestyle that feels balanced. Families can stay active without draining their budget. Couples can explore different neighborhoods every weekend, and young professionals still get plenty of social energy without the non-stop intensity of larger cities. For many people relocating here, this becomes one of the unexpected reasons they end up loving St. Louis more than they thought they would. Another major reason people connect with St. Louis so quickly is the sports culture. Even if you're not a huge sports fan, it's not hard to feel the energy here. The Cardinals, Blues, and the St. Louis City SC aren't just teams people casually follow. They're part of the identity of the city. Game days completely change the atmosphere downtown. Restaurants fill up, people wear team gear everywhere, and entire neighborhoods rally around the excitement. There's a sense of community that a lot of transplants say they didn't expect. And honestly, that matters more than people realize when moving somewhere new. One of the hardest parts about relocating is feeling disconnected at first. In some cities, it can take years to feel like you actually belong. But in St. Louis, many newcomers say the strong local pride helps them feel part of the community much faster. Sports become this shared language that instantly creates conversation and connection. But even beyond sports, St. Louis has a very neighborhood driven culture. People support local businesses, local events, and local traditions in a way that gives the city a more personal feel. And in time, when places feel increasingly disconnected, that sense of community is becoming one of the biggest reasons people choose to stay here long term. Another reason St. Louis is attracting more attention lately is the job market, especially in healthcare, education, biotech, and professional services. A lot of people outside the region assume career opportunities here are limited, but the reality is very different. St. Louis has several major employers, respected hospitals, universities, financial institutions, and growing industries that continue bringing professionals into the area. Healthcare in particular is a huge driver. The city has nationally recognized medical systems, research institutions, and healthcare networks that create thousands of stable jobs across different skill levels. That's one reason many medical professionals, researchers, and students continue relocating here every year. At the same time, remote work has completely changed the way people think about where they live. Before, many workers stayed in expensive cities because that's where the jobs were concentrated. Now, a growing number of professionals can keep higher paying remote jobs while living somewhere with a much lower cost of living. And for many of them, St. Louis checks a lot of boxes. You get affordability, strong infrastructure, reliable internet, major airport access, sports, entertainment, and enough city energy without paying extreme housing prices. Young professionals, especially, are starting to see the appeal of building a life somewhere they can actually get ahead financially instead of constantly trying to catch up. And that's become one of the biggest themes behind the city's recent momentum. People aren't just moving to St. Louis because it's cheaper. They're moving because they believe they can create a more sustainable lifestyle here long term while still having career opportunities and access to major city resources. That combination is becoming harder and harder to find in the United States right now. One of the most underrated things about St. Louis is how different the neighborhoods feel from one another. A lot of cities start blending together after a while, but St. Louis has areas with completely different personalities depending on the kind of lifestyle you want. If you like a more urban environment, you've got places with loft apartments, nightlife, restaurants, coffee shops, and walkable streets. If you want something quieter and more family oriented, there are suburbs with larger homes, strong school districts, parks, and a slower pace. And if you love historic architecture, there are neighborhoods filled with brick homes, tree-lined streets, and character you just can't replicate in newer developments. That flexibility matters because not everyone relocating here wants the same experience. Some people move for affordability while still wanting a city atmosphere. Others are looking for space to raise a family, and some just want a lifestyle that feels calmer without giving up access to entertainment and convenience. St. Louis gives people multiple ways to live. That's also why many newcomers end up staying longer than they originally planned. They realize the city isn't just one thing. You can spend one weekend exploring trendy restaurants and breweries downtown, then drive a short distance and suddenly be in a completely different environment with quiet neighborhoods and parks. There's variety without needing to travel hours away. And because housing prices are generally lower than many larger metro areas, people often have more freedom to choose the kind of neighborhood they actually want instead of simply settling for whatever they can afford. For a lot of relocators, that becomes a major quality of life upgrade. They're not just finding a cheaper place to live, they're finding a place that fits the lifestyle they've been wanting for years. The final reason so many people are moving to St. Louis is something that's harder to measure, but probably matters the most: quality of life. A lot of people are simply tired. Tired of spending most of their income on housing, tired of endless traffic, tired of crowded cities, constant pressure, and feeling like life has become one non-stop cycle of stress and expenses. And when people move to St. Louis, many realize they can finally slow down a little without giving up the things they care about. That slower pace doesn't mean boring, it means manageable. People have more time with family, more flexibility financially, shorter commutes, and more opportunities to actually enjoy their weekends instead of constantly trying to recover from the work week. For some families, it means finally buying their first home. For others, it means having enough savings left over to travel, start businesses, invest, or simply stop worrying about money every single month. And that freedom creates a different kind of lifestyle, one where people feel less overwhelmed and more in control of their future. That's really the biggest reason many people end up loving St. Louis after relocating here. The city gives them a chance to build a life that feels sustainable again. And in today's economy, that's becoming incredibly valuable. So when you put everything together, it becomes a lot easier to understand why more people are moving to St. Louis right now. You've got affordable housing, strong community energy, major sports culture, great food, free attractions, career opportunities, and neighborhoods that fit almost every type of lifestyle. But more importantly, you have something many people feel like they've lost in bigger and more expensive cities: balance. That's really what attracts so many newcomers here. St. Louis gives people the opportunity to own homes, lower their stress, spend more time with family, and still enjoy the benefits of living in a major metro area without constantly feeling financially overwhelmed. And sure, no city is perfect. Every place has trade-offs. But for a growing number of families, remote workers, young professionals, and first-time homebuyers, St. Louis is starting to feel like one of the smartest relocation choices in the country, especially for people who are looking beyond hype and focusing on long-term quality of life. Now, I want to hear from you. Could you see yourself living in St. Louis? Or if you already live here, what do you think is the biggest reason people are moving in? Drop your thoughts and questions in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications for more content about relocating, living, and investing in St. Louis and across the Midwest.